Hi boys and girls, welcome to your video on comparing and ordering integers. In the previous video you learned what an integer was. Now we're going to take those examples and compare and order them. So we often compare things in life, things like music. For example, you might think one type of music is greater than the other type of music. By the way, bonus points if anyone knows who this band is. We often compare brands. Some people think that one brand might be a little bit better than the other type of sports brand. We tend to compare food. One type of food place might be better than the other type of food place. In my opinion, D'Alessandro's is so much better than Geno's. Sports teams. A lot of people like to argue, but when they argue, they compare sports teams. They might think one sports team is better than the other, or they might think less of a certain sports team. No comments here. As you get older, you tend to compare weather. Some places are a lot warmer in temperature than other places, or some people might like the colder temperature. And we often start to compare distances. How long is it going to take me to get from one location to another location? Or is one distance shorter than another distance? So when we compare integers, we use two different signs in math. This sign here represents less than. And I'll give you an example in a minute. Some people have trouble remembering how to read this symbol. If you read from left to right, we start with a smaller section and it gets wider. Okay, so I would like to think of it as less than. In comparison, when reading this symbol here, we start with a bigger section and it gets smaller. So because we start with the bigger section, this would read greater than. These are both symbols that you would have learned last year. Whoops. But it's just kind of a quick reminder of both of those. Let me erase this here. Again, this is less than. And this is greater than. Sometimes kids like to think of it as the Pac-Man is eating the bigger number. Again, we are in middle school, so I kind of want to move on from that, but Pac-Man is actually kind of cool. All right, comparing integers. What I did is I created a number line that was vertical. So think about this as sea level. So the level in which you're standing is at 0. If you go up in elevation, it increases. And as you go down in elevation, it decreases. Hence our positive numbers and our negative numbers. When comparing two positive numbers, the higher on the number line it goes, the greater the symbol. So in this case, 9 is greater than 3, or I can think of it as 3 is less than 9. For those of you that like Pac-Man, the Pac-Man is eating the greater number. Now again here, 15 is higher on the number line, therefore 15 is greater than 12. Now, when comparing negative numbers and positive numbers, if one of them is negative, the other one is positive, you can automatically assume that the positive number is greater. But for you visual learners, when talking about negative and positive numbers, the further down the number is, the smaller the number is. So in this case, negative 4 is here. 10 is all the way up here. Therefore, 10 is greater than negative 4, or negative 4 is less than 10. In this example here, again, we have a positive number and a negative number. We can already conclude that the positive number is going to be greater than the negative number. Now, what happens when you have two negatives? I have -3 and -7. If you notice, -7 is lower on the number line than -3. Therefore, -7 is actually less than -3. Or you can look at it as -3 is greater than -7. With negative numbers, the larger the digit, the smaller it actually is. If you go -7 compared to -3, you are further away from 0. Therefore, it makes it a smaller integer. Here's another example. -17 would be all the way down here. Since -2 is closer to 0, it's actually greater than -17. So from here, we can then order integers. In this case, we're going to think of it as least to greatest. With all positive numbers, we can use our number line, or at this point, you should be familiar with which numbers are greater or less than each other. Looking at these numbers, 2 is the smallest. Then I would go 5 is the next number further from 0, 9, and then 16. But it gets tricky when you start to incorporate negative numbers. In this case here, -2 is the only negative number, therefore I can assume it's the smallest. Now I have 3 positive integers. I have 5, then 6, then 8. On this slide here, I have 2 numbers that are negative. Again, the bigger the digits with negative numbers, the smaller it is. So -14 is actually the smallest out of all of these. Then -2. Now I'm only left with 2 positive numbers, and I know 3 is smaller than 9. One more slide. This is probably the hardest. All of my numbers are negative. At this point, I need to determine which integer is furthest from 0. In this case, -23 is the biggest digit, therefore it's the furthest away from 0. Next coming up would be -8, -5, and then -1. -1 is the greatest out of all of these negative integers because it's the closest to 0. So what I want you to do is take out your graphic organizer. What I did is I put on here the greater than and less than symbols just to help you to read those a little bit better. Here's your greater than, and here's your less than. Here's an example of a number line. As the numbers decrease to the left, they are negative, and numbers increase as we go to the right, therefore they're positive. So if I look at each of these digits, 7 would be located here. I have -4, +2, -8, -10, and then +9. So if I were to order them, looking at my number line, -10 would come first. That's the smallest. Next would be -8, because that comes next on my number line. Then I have -4. I've taken care of all my negative numbers. Now I'm going to look at my positive numbers. So I have +2, +7, and +9. Okay, in class tomorrow, we are going to apply this information to understanding our catapults a little bit more. So if you did not watch this video, you will have to make it up in class. But we are going to apply this information again to using our catapults. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me tomorrow in class. All right, have a good evening, and I will see you tomorrow.